Tonight, I want to tell you about the night an ordinary clinic doctor learned the difference between fixing and healing. It began on a salt-bright evening in New England, with gulls stitching white arcs over the harbor, and a man who laughed like relief after a long winter. He kissed me like a vow. He undressed me like he was honoring something holy. But this story isn't about heat. It's about tenderness, consent, and two grown men finding safety in each other's steadiness. Settle in, breathe easy, and let your heart rest. We're going to walk home together. Tonight, friend, if this kind of gentle, heart-forward storytelling nourishes you, please tap like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a chapter. Share this with someone who needs a soft place to land and leave a comment with your favorite line. Now, breathe with me. We're here, in safety. I'm Daniel Reed. I'm 58, a primary care physician on the working waterfront of Portland, Maine. If you've ever sat in a waiting room with the faint smell of sanitizer and coffee that's been keeping warm a little too long, you know my world by heart. Flu seasons, cholesterol lectures, the quiet victory of a stable blood pressure, the heartbreak of a diagnosis I wish I could lift off a chart and throw into the bay. When I was younger, I thought medicine was about answers. These days, I think it's about presence. Sometimes that means listening. Sometimes it means saying, let's take a breath together, and watching a patient's shoulders soften by a fraction. I had a marriage in my 30s that ended, with gentleness, but not without pain. My daughter Ava is 29, lives in Boston, and sends me pictures of her farmer's market tomatoes like she's found treasure. I came out to her a few years after the divorce. She hugged me, cried a little, and texted, "Proud of you, Dad." That text still lives in the favorite folder on my phone. I was not looking for romance. That's a phrase people say when they trip neatly into it, but it was true. My home was simple. An old oak table that wobbled on one leg. A pot of basil on the sill that I kept forgetting to rotate toward the sun. A cedar bowl by the door for keys and old coins, shaped by someone's careful hands. The city has a way of blending salt and sawdust, and I love it for that. Blue-collar men in beanies, women with paint on their knuckles, the child who always pedals uphill like it's a dare. On a Tuesday in late September, the clinic was quiet at 2 in the afternoon and loud by 2:30. Nurse Clarissa poked her head into my office and said, "You've got a new patient, Dr. Reed, Michael Hart, shoulder pain, woodworking type. Good smile, wore flannel like it's his second skin." I smiled without meaning to. Woodworking. Type meant sawdust in the cuffs and hands with stories. "Send him in," I said. He came in leaning a little to the left, a habit people get when they've defended their pain for too long. Brown hair a little grayer at the temples than he probably realized. Blue eyes that had the light weathered right into them. A square jaw softened by laugh lines. He wore the kind of flannel that had seen at least 2 winters. One of those men whose presence made a room feel steadier but not heavier. He stuck out his hand and said, "I'm Michael. Sorry if I'm early. Traffic at the circle turned out to be mercy for once." "Daniel," I said, shaking his hand. "Welcome. Let's see about that shoulder." If you've been to a doctor, you know the routine. How long? Where exactly? What makes it worse? Any numbness or tingling? He had rotator cuff complaints, likely aggravated by planing wood boards and lifting things like planks and pride. I asked him what he built. He said boat ribs sometimes, kitchen tables often. I moved up from Ohio a year ago to be near the water and away from my own ghosts. Turns out ghosts can swim. His laugh was the kind that arrives with a second meaning, a little foghorn of fear under the grin, and I recognized it. It's the laugh I've used myself when someone asked if I ever get lonely. I moved his arm gently through ranges of motion. He winced when we found the arc that had been biting him. I felt the tendon hitch and the muscles trying to help. The body is such a loyal companion, it will do strange dances to protect us. "Nothing catastrophic," I said. "Likely inflammation. Overuse. There are exercises. We can try a steroid injection if needed, but we'll start conservative. He nodded, relief softening his face like afternoon light. Conservative I can do, he said. Used to think I could grind through anything. But I turned 55, and my joints started negotiating separate contracts. We both smiled at that. Clarissa brought a handout for shoulder rehab and demonstrated a few moves with the elastic band we keep in the drawer that otherwise holds tongue depressors and birthday cards patients send with apple stickers on them. 3 sets, she said. Go slow. Talk to your shoulder like it owes you money. Michael laughed. That I can do, he said. Before he left, he glanced at the photographs on my office wall. Not the medical certificates, the ones you dust because your mother will ask, but the little frames of my daughter as a toddler in yellow boots standing knee-deep in the ocean, of my father teaching me how to fly a kite on a grassy hill. Nice kite, he said, pointing. Thank you, I said. He bought it at a corner shop. Told me the trick was to let it pull, then guide it instead of wrestling. Turns out that advice works for most of life. Michael nodded slowly. He had that carpenter's listening, the kind that makes you feel like your words are being measured and fitted carefully. I like that, he said. Guiding instead of wrestling. He left with a neatly folded elastic band, a list of exercises, and an appointment on my schedule for follow-up in 2 weeks. I watched him walk out, shoulders squared but softer at the corners, and told myself to get a glass of water. Hydration is one of those things I preach and rarely practice. It's a strange thing to feel a click in your chest that isn't a flutter of arrhythmia. It isn't dramatic. It feels like a lock that's been sticky for years, finally sliding smooth. I knew enough to notice it. I knew enough to do nothing. 2 weeks later, he came back. Shoulder improved. He looked less tired. He told me about a kitchen table he'd finished for a family expecting twins. How he carved 2 small birds on the underside where only the babies would know to look one day when they crawled beneath to play. That detail told me everything about the man. Some people build for what shows. Others build for the small, private moments that become home. Your shoulder's stronger, I said, testing his range. You've done the work. I used to rush, he said. Sand to a shine where wood wanted a slower hand. Getting older feels like learning to listen all over again. We scheduled another check-in, but I did something else that day. I told him I had a community talk to give at the library next Thursday night. Sleep, stress, and the aging heart. I joked about the free cookies. He said, I like libraries, I like cookies. Could use an excuse to sit still and listen to someone. Tell me to put my phone down. I felt a little spark in my chest and pressed it down gently, not to smother it, but to keep it from spooking. Boundaries matter. So I added, listen, if we keep talking outside the clinic, I'd feel better referring your medical care to a colleague. Honest transparency. We can't do both. He held my gaze without flinching. That's fair, he said. I appreciate the kindness. On the night of the library talk, the room smelled like old paper and lemon cleaning spray, the kind of combination that finds the child in you and sets him in a chair with his knees together. I do these talks 4 times a year. Sleep hygiene, stress management, what to do when your knees start making noises like a house settling in winter. People come with their notebooks and their questions, and sometimes they ask about their husband's cough or their wife's restless legs, and sometimes they simply want to be told they're doing a good job trying. Michael sat in the second row, flannel swapped for a soft navy sweater. He listened like a craftsman, head tilted, hands quiet, eyes steady. When I made a joke about night snacks, he laughed, and the laugh woke a few other laughs, like kindling catching. Afterward, he waited while I answered questions and packed up. We stepped into the sweet, sharp September night, and the stars did that thing where they're so clear they look like a spill you could mop up with your sleeve. You have a good bedside manner, he said, like a well-worn porch chair, sturdy, kind. That's the nicest compliment, I said. Thank you. Coffee? He asked. And it was a simple question, delivered with a carpenter's certainty that whatever happened next, he could sand and adjust and make it fit. Yes, I said. Coffee would be nice. We walked to the harbor cafe that stays open late for fishermen and insomniacs. He ordered decaf. I ordered the same. If you ever want to make a working man grin, order what he orders. Not because you want to be the same, but because you honor where he's chosen to find comfort. We sat by the window. Gulls slept on pilings. The lights on the water shook themselves into lines. We talked like men who had waited a long time to hear their own truth spoken back to them gently. He told me why he left Ohio, a house too full of silence after his mother died, a father's, old expectations he didn't want to carry anymore. He told me he'd loved men quietly for a long time, had one great kind love in his 40s that ended because fear is a stubborn roommate. I told him about my marriage, about coming out to Eva. About the nights I pressed my palm flat against the window pane when it stormed, just to feel something bigger than my own thoughts. He didn't reach for my hand. I didn't ask for his. We sat close to the same warmth without rushing to share it. That, too, is a kind of intimacy. When we stood to leave, he put cash on the saucer and said, "I like listening to you. I like how you make space." I said, "I like that you see the details most people miss." We walked to the corner, the kind of corner where a choice is simple despite everything else, this way or that. He said, "I'm going left," and I said, "Right." And we grinned like 14-year-olds who had dared to stand near the person they liked and found the world didn't split in two. "Good night." "Daniel," he said. "Good night, Michael," I said. My name and his in my mouth like the first slow sip of a drink you've always wanted. If the story ended there, 2 men, 1 coffee, a yes waiting patiently, it would still be enough for a certain kind of ache to soften. But we kept going. Gently. Deliberately. I transferred his medical care to Dr. Singh across the hall, who gave me the raised eyebrow of a woman with 3 sons and a lot of wisdom, and said, "Good, be happy. But hydrate." We met for walks. The Eastern Prom Trail is a ribbon of grace, and we followed it past morning joggers, strollers, old men wearing caps from wars they survived, dogs who looked like their owners, and owners who looked like their dogs. Michael told me about the first thing he'd ever built, a crooked bookshelf that leaned into the wall as if it were tired. I told him about my first day in the hospital as a med student, the smell of antiseptic, the green of scrubs like a field. You were afraid to step wrong on. The first time I learned that being quiet and kind often helped more than being right and loud. We ate oysters by the dozen one Sunday afternoon because neither of us had ever really liked them, but felt we should. At least try to be brave in their direction. They tasted like the ocean snuck into our mouths to remind us we had both left and returned. We laughed until people looked over and smiled at us, and that felt like permission. When the first nor'easter rolled through, he lost power at his workshop and texted, "You got soup?" I did. Potato leek, which is only complex if you're trying, to impress someone. He came over with a mason jar full of dried cherry tomatoes he'd grown in a patch behind his rental, a red pocket of August, to tip into winter. We ate at my wobbly table and then set the bowl aside while he crawled under the table to wedge a cedar shim he pulled from his jacket pocket like a magician finding a coin behind your ear. "Try now," he said, his voice muffled. I pressed, my palm to the tabletop. The wobble was gone. We looked at each other and laughed quiet, like you do in church when you shouldn't, and it's joy anyway. We didn't rush. There are so many ways to go fast in this life. We chose slow. He told me he woke sometimes at 3 a.m., thinking of his mother's last days. I told him about the patient I couldn't save at 27, how sometimes I still apologize to him in the car on the drive home when the light turns long. We talked about the indignities of aging, the way knees report for duty in the morning, like grumpy employees and backs call in sick without notice. We talked about the sweetness, too, the relief that comes from not pretending to be anyone else. Adults don't get enough firsts. We get promotions, diagnoses, anniversaries, and deliveries of appliances on the wrong day between noon and 6. But firsts? They thin out. He was a first in a way that made my lungs feel like rooms I hadn't walked in for years, freshly opened. One evening in late October, the air held that metallic chill that makes you wish you had worn a scarf and makes you feel a little brave for not. He invited me to his workshop. The sign said, "Heart and Grain," hand-painted, hanging by a chain that clicked dutifully in the soft wind. Inside, the smell made me a boy again. Sawdust, oil, the ghost of pine. Wood shavings curled on the floor like ribbon. He had a project on the sawhorses, not quite a boat, but something that could become one with patience. Ribs and the idea of a hull. "I'm learning," he said. "Always wanted to build one. Not big, but something that could. Take 2 people into the cove without asking too many questions." I touched the timber. The grain rose under my fingers as stubborn and honest as a life. "Wood remembers," I said. "Hands do too." He handed me a small block plane and stood behind me, not touching, just close enough that I could feel the heat of him. "Pull," he said softly. "Don't push. Let the tool do the talking." I did, and a thin shaving rose and curled, pale as a moon sliver. We stood there, the 2 of us, a doctor and a carpenter, both learning the same thing. It's never just about the thing in your hands, it's about your willingness to listen. If you are listening to this and waiting for the moment, I want to honor your patience. The best moments often show up when you've stopped staring at the door and started stirring the soup. It was a Sunday night. The storm had passed. The moon was a coin in a wet street. He came over carrying a paper bag that clinked like good news. 2 bottles of ginger ale, dark chocolate, and a lemon. He said, "In case you're the kind of man who likes to make something from simple things." I said, "I am." And I wasn't talking about cookies. We watched the kind of old movie that lets you breathe. The hero was kind but flawed. The music was strings and a little piano like rain on a roof. He sat at the end of the couch. I sat at mine. Our knees met in the middle like neighbors. We said very little. When the credits rolled, the room held that soft, brave silence that either breaks or bends towards something. "Can I sit closer?" he asked, voice steady and low. "The way you speak when you're measuring twice? Cutting once?" "Yes," I said. He moved. Our shoulders touched, then our arms, a little. He turned, not urgent, not timid, just present. He paused. I felt the question in the air like the moment before the doctor presses the stethoscope to listen. I nodded. He leaned in. Let me be clear for those listening with their grandkids asleep in the next room, or for those who carry tenderness like an heirloom. This was not about spectacle. It was about reverence. About 2 adults who had waited long enough to do this with attention. He touched my face like a man learning a new language by reciting poetry. I lifted the hem of his sweater the way you open a gift slowly, because the wrapping is part of the moment. He paused again, eyes on mine, and asked, "Are you comfortable? Do you want to stop?" The questions were a blanket. I said, "I'm with you." The answer, a porch light left on. What we shared that night was not for the gawking world. We held each other like a calm room. He found the places on my shoulder where stress made a home and asked them to move along. I traced the lines on his back like someone reading a familiar map and suddenly understanding the distance between towns. We laughed when my old dog, Harvey, he's 9 and fancies himself a chaperone, jumped up to wedge between us for 30 blessed seconds as if to say, "Excuse me, respect the rules," and then, satisfied, snored at our feet. We slept. That was the holy part, too. The way the breath of another person can teach yours a rhythm it forgot. He woke once and pulled the blanket up to my shoulder. I whispered. Thank you. And meant it with the weight I use when I tell a patient, you're okay. Morning came with rain. That small rain that feels like talking. We made pancakes because it felt right. He sliced the lemon and squeezed a little juice into the batter the way his mother had done, which he confessed only after I said, what is that taste? He said, memory, and we both stood still for a second to honor her. He buttoned his shirt slowly, kissed my forehead, and said, I like us. I like how careful we are. Me too, I said. Careful is not the enemy of passion. It's the soil it grows in. He nodded, smiled. A smile that found the boy and the man in the same mouth, and left, walking down my steps like a person who knew how to carry joy without dropping it. Monday came as it does with messages and lab, results and the sound of shoes squeaking in hallways. Nurse Clarissa put her elbow on my doorframe and said, you look taller. Did you sleep horizontal instead of in a question mark? I laughed. I did. Also, I'm hydrating, I said, raising my water bottle like a toast. About time, she said. You're no good to anybody if you dry up. I tell you that because love doesn't wash your life clean of its clutter. It gives you the energy to put a few things back where they belong. I found it easier to be present with my patients. I found it easier to say, I don't know, when I didn't. I found it easier to walk the long loop home instead of the short. Of course, there were conversations. I told Eva. I called her on a Tuesday night because I know she likes Tuesdays. Less pressure than Friday or Sunday. I told her I'd met someone. I told her his name. I waited, counted my breaths to 4 on the inhale, 6 on the exhale, the way I teach patients who carry anxiety like extra luggage. Dad, she said, and the way she said Dad made my eyes sting. That's wonderful. You sound soft. Good soft. He makes me laugh, I said. He fixes tables. He makes lemon pancakes. Marry him, she said, then laughed, then said, kidding. Not kidding. I want to meet him. You will, I said. I told my sister Susan. She asked all the right questions. Does he show up when he says he will? Does he apologize without making it a performance? Does he drink water? I laughed. Yes, yes, yes. Winter came. The harbor iced along the edges, like a glass of something left half-finished. We wore hats pulled low and called each other from the end of our noses. We shoveled. We salted. We visited the hardware store for reasons that were excuses, to be together among shelves of possibilities. He built me a little bench for the end of my bed. Sunflower yellow in the dead of February. A promise in the shape of a seat. I made him soup that tasted like patience. Beans and ham and bay leaf, the kind of bowl that heats your hands and keeps you at the table longer than you planned. We had our first argument, of course. Everyone does. It was nothing dramatic, but the small things are often the ones that carry old freight. I had worked late without telling him. He had waited with dinner and a look that wasn't angry exactly, but tired. He said, I don't mind the work. I mind the not knowing. I bristled, the way a younger version of me had learned to bristle to gain some space. I said something about not needing a chaperone. He said nothing for a full minute, which is a long time when you've made a point and are waiting for someone to fight. I care about your time because I care about you, he said finally. I don't want to be your calendar. I want to be your person who knows what your calendar can do to you. We sat. We breathed. I said slowly, I'm sorry. I forget sometimes that being careful with information is not the same as being careful with someone's heart. I can do better. You already are, he said, and put his hand on mine in the way carpenters do everything. Weighed, measured, precise enough to hold without pinching, strong enough to be felt. Spring in Maine is a rumor until it isn't. One day the world is brown and gray and the kind of green that only poets can see, and the next day forsythia throws yellow like confetti and you forgive winter everything. We started leaving the windows open a little. We let the harbor sounds in. We planned a small thing, A Saturday morning where we'd bring coffee to the fishermen and ask about their boats because curiosity is a kind of love that makes strong friends. We went to meet Ava. She hugged Michael like she'd been practicing. He brought her a cutting board, maple with a little edge of cherry that looked like sunrise if you squinted. She cried. He cried. I didn't cry because I was the doctor and someone had to stay clinically upright, but my nose got that warning. Byrne and I took an extra long drink of water. I made lemon pancakes, he told her, and their conversation became its own river. They talked books, city neighborhoods, the best tacos in East Boston. She asked him if he liked musicals, and he said, "Only if they surprise me." And she laughed because she knew exactly what he meant. We walked by the Charles under a blue, so confident you could lean your back against it. He and Eva went ahead of me, their shoulders angled toward each other in a way that felt like a prayer being answered in plain sight. I thought about the people who never get this gift, whose love lives in the margins and between the lines because family is a language that never learned to say the good words. I tucked gratitude into my pocket like a note to be found later. At the hardware store, Mr. Patel, who has sold me more light bulbs than any man should have to, said, "This your guy?" And I said, with a kind of joy that surprised me by its ease, "Yes." Michael shook his hand and looked at me, and in his look was home. That night, after we'd watched a ball game with the volume down like people do when they love the lulls, more than the shouting, he said, "I've been thinking about the boat." I thought he meant the one in his shop. He did, and he didn't. "I want to take it out with you," he said. "Not just the boat. Life. The parts where the weather changes. The parts where we laugh at nothing. The parts where we go quiet because something hurts. But we know the other is there. Steady." I said, "I want that too," and felt a door in my chest swing open on well-oiled hinges. Work, care, and the tender art of being a person. There's a way love can make you better at your job if your job is care. You start noticing the small ways people save their own lives. The woman who sat with her grief and read to it instead of trying to evict it. The man who admitted he was scared of the MRI tube and let me talk him through it step by soft step. What he would hear, what he would feel, what he could imagine as an anchor. I started ending more appointments with the same sentence. "What? Feels manageable this week?" People's faces changed when I asked that. We don't talk enough about manageability. It sounds unromantic until you realize that manageability is the path to sustainability. Love taught me that. Michael taught me to say, "We can sand a little today. We don't have to plane the whole board." In our evenings, we folded laundry like a ceremony. Fold, smooth, stack. I learned the way he tucked t-shirts into a square. That fit perfectly in my drawer. He learned the way my socks insist on being rolled because I am a creature of habit about ridiculous things. He made me the bench. I hung a shelf under the window for herbs that could survive my benign neglect. Basil, mint, rosemary that smelled like memory and apology. We talked about the big things you avoid when you're younger because they feel like saying them aloud. Will collapse the sky. What we want for the end of our lives. Who to call. Where to keep the papers. Who gets the cedar bowl by the door. These aren't morbid details. They're architecture. They're the way you build a life that can hold the weight of its own weather. "Promise me," Michael said. "If there ever comes a day when you're the one who needs to be held up, you'll let me do it." I said, "I promise," and meant it in the careful way promises should be meant, with sturdy footing and both eyes open. If you're older, you know the pleasure of the slow things. The coffee that takes its time. The book you don't finish. On vacation because you're too busy watching the ocean make and unmake its case. We became connoisseurs of small delights. The tiny osprey nest at the top of the crane. The neighbor dog who brought us his leash as if offering a formal dance. The way a new bridge dutifully announced its steel smell before relaxing into the city's chorus. Michael started a habit. Each morning before he left for the shop, he would write down one line on a scrap and leave it on the kitchen counter under a small rock he'd found on the beach, shaped exactly like a heart if you tilted your head and squinted kindly. The lines were not grand. They were noticing. Your laugh made me late for work. The rosemary is a show-off. Harbor calm this morning. You'd like it. I started one of my own. I texted him a single sentence around lunchtime. Something like, the patient who was scared of shots told me a joke and made me brave. Or, I love the lemon trick. We built a vocabulary of ordinary wonders. That's how you make a house. Not with walls, but with sentences that fit in the hand. The great loves aren't necessarily the ones with the biggest gestures. They're the ones where you share a grocery list and it feels like a sonnet. No life is without them. March brought one we hadn't planned. He slipped on black ice outside the shop and fell, hard, onto the shoulder that had brought him into my office in the first place. Pain found him like an eager dog. Dr. Singh saw him in the clinic right away and texted me the way colleagues do when both professional and personal rows get braided. He's okay. Hurt pride, inflamed tissue, sling, ice. Tell him he's allowed to be cared for. He hated the sling. Hated asking for help. The strongest people do. I wore my doctor voice and my boyfriend voice at the same time, a combination that sounded like warm soup and firm directives. We iced. We breathed. I learned that the sound of a man saying, "I don't want to be trouble," is an invitation to say, "You're not. This is what love does." He learned that letting someone tie your shoes for a week is not a loss. It's a ritual. We sat still together. We read the same mystery novel and argued about the killer while not so secretly enjoying being on the same side. He fell asleep with his head on my chest, and Harvey snored in a counterpoint that would have made a jazz musician smile. This is health, too. The resting, the not doing, the allowing. If you're listening right now and your body is telling you it needs rest, consider this your permission slip, signed by a doctor and a man who learned the hard was easy when shared. Small. Towns don't always know what to do with love that doesn't look like the postcards. But Portland had softened over the years, like so many places do when enough kindness stands still and refuses to be pushed. We went to a potluck at the community church. A low building with a bell that rings out of habit and habit becomes scripture. The cook, Mrs. Patterson, had known me since I moved into the neighborhood. She came close, put 2 warm rolls in my hand, and said, "We've been waiting." Mrs. Patterson has that kind of authority that comes from raising kids and grandkids and casseroles and having more love than any town can hold. She hugged Michael with both arms and one laugh. "You build? My porch needs to stop complaining about winter." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and she nodded like she had decided he'd been part of the town all along and everyone else was just catching up. There were small stares here and there, the kind that aren't hostile, just curious. We stared back with kindness. That helps. It's hard to hate someone who smiles at your baby and asks if the nap was good. It's harder to hold on to your stranger act when you've eaten the same potato salad under the same banner that reads, "Community Day," in red letters that have been a little lopsided for a decade. We weren't heroes. We were 2 men in midlife, holding hands sometimes, not all the time, grocery shopping, volunteering at the library book sale, attending a city council meeting where Michael stood up and spoke about funding for youth woodworking. Classes. "Hands that build become hearts that trust," he said, and people clapped because it was true. When the boat was ready enough to meet water, boats are never done. They're like love that way. We carried it to the cove with help. From 2 teenagers he'd hired at the shop, boys with pants too big and hearts just the right size. The sky was so blue it felt like a dare. The water said, "Come," and we said yes. We pushed off. The boat took us like an idea becoming a sentence. He rowed a little, I rowed a little, and we drifted. The city on our left. The horizon like a suggestion on our right. He looked at me. I looked at him. It felt like the quiet you hear at 3 a.m., when the whole world is your house, and you can walk the halls and thank each room by name. "Daniel," he said, voice steady, "I don't want big. I don't want gold balloons and speeches. I want, if it's okay with you, to say our promises in the kitchen with the basil and the herbs and the dog and the table that doesn't wobble anymore. I want to stand up next to you and tell whoever needs to hear it that you're my person and I'm yours, and then I want us to go back to being exactly who we've been from the beginning. Slow, careful, funny, tired sometimes, brave enough." I laughed, the kind of laugh that is mostly a sob in a suit and tie. "Yes," I said, "yes." And he smiled like a man who had just planed a board true and run his palm along it and felt nothing but good. We told Ava and Susan and Clarissa and Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Patel, and they all said some version of finally and about time and can I bring rolls? The city sent us a slant of sunshine through the kitchen window at exactly 4 in the afternoon on the day we planned to stand opposite each other and say the words. We wrote our promises on index cards because we are practical men who know emotions, make hands tremble. We used simple words. We said, "I will tell you the truth kindly." We said, "I will not hold you to yesterday's mistakes." We said, "I will drink water." We said, "I will be first to say I'm sorry." We said, "I will hold your hand under the table when you are afraid and over the table when you are proud." We said, "I will laugh with you." We said, "I will cut lemon into our pancakes even when the grocery list says only basics, because joy is a basic." I kissed him with the softness of the first night and the certainty of the last. He kissed me like a vow again, which made sense because it was. Harvey barked once, as if to witness. The basil leaned toward the light and played its small part. We ate a piece of cake from the grocery store with icing that tried too hard, and we loved it for that exact reason. People think wedding days, vow days, promise days, whatever you call them, are peaks. And they are. But even mountains have meadows. The days after are where you do the walking. We returned library books, we made dinner. We went to the hardware store where Mr. Patel gave us a discount because love is inventory that never runs out. We called Ava. We sat on the porch and listened to the evening collect itself like a careful mother gathering toys before bedtime. The intimacy you build when you're older is a kind of housekeeping. Not in the sense of chores, though. There are those. But in the craft of it. You keep each other. You keep kind. You keep on. We didn't do everything right. We snapped sometimes. He got a splinter, cursed, swept up, and then apologized to no one and everyone because he'd let an old anger poke out like a nail. I forgot to call when I said I would and came home with groceries like an apology. We laughed over spaghetti. That tasted better than it had a right to, and somewhere in between the second and third sip of ginger ale, we said, "We're lucky," and meant it. At the clinic, a patient asked me what to do about loneliness. I told him about community, about walks, about the small bravery of showing up to the same place twice so faces become familiar. I didn't tell him about Michael because patients are not where I look for absolution or applause. But I told him that sometimes the most medicinal thing you can do for your heart is to let it see that the world is still happening, to go where it happens, to become part of the accident of joy. Michael and I started a Saturday morning ritual. We'd wake early, drink coffee, and drive to the farmer's market. He'd touch tomatoes like a jeweler inspecting stones. I'd choose an extra loaf of bread for Mrs. Patterson even when she insisted she didn't need it. We'd buy flowers that were not practical, and that was the point. We learned the names of the vendors' children. They learned Harvey's. We built not a family in the legal sense, but a collection of names and nods and quick smiles that felt like a safety net. If you're older and listening, and you think, "It's too late. I want to give you this." It isn't. It may not look like the stories you were sold. It may be in a kitchen with a basil plant and two mugs that don't match, and a dog that insists on being included in the conversation. It may include doctor's appointments where the reading glasses stay on and jokes about joints that snap like bubble wrap. It may include the grief you thought would always make your hands shake, finally softening enough that you can pick up the cup without spilling. You deserve a careful love, one that asks, "Are you comfortable?" and means it. One that listens and hears. One that undresses you like a reverent man unfolding a flag after a long season of weather. Not sanctimonious. Sacred in the way ordinary life can be when two people decide to keep it sacred. Michael still leaves the notes under the rock. Yesterday's read, "Saw an osprey dive, thought of your patience." Mine read, "Patient told me the MRI was a spaceship, and we were both astronauts." I believed him. These are our vows, repeated daily in languages only we speak. Sometimes at night, when the harbor is quiet and the gulls are off duty and the town looks like a painting of itself, I feel him turn toward me in his sleep, a small, unconscious drift like a boat adjusting to a change in current. I adjust too. We find each other somewhere in the middle, and it isn't hard. When my hands are on his shoulders, I don't think about rotator cuffs. I think about the first night and the careful way he asked. I think about the small miracle of two men who learned late but not too late that careful is not the opposite of passion. It is the cradle. When he kisses me, it still feels like a vow. When he undresses me, even now, years in, it still feels like he is honoring something holy. Not because we're perfect, because we're present. If you've stayed with me all this, thank you. I wanted to tell you about a love that didn't apologize for being tender. A love in the city by the harbor where gulls write their cursive across the sky, and wood shavings make soft islands on the floor, and a dog snores in a rhythm that sounds like a lullaby. I wanted to show you a doctor who learned that healing lives, as much in a kitchen as in a clinic, and a carpenter who found that the strongest joints aren't hidden. They're made visible on purpose so people can see what holds a thing together. I wanted to leave you with something you can put in your pocket. This sentence, maybe. Go slow. Be kind. Ask, "Are you comfortable?" Mean it. Drink water. Leave a note under a rock. Laugh over pancakes. Build something that floats. And when love finds you, not as a storm, but as a steady tide, let it carry you a little, and then learn how to row with it.